Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, as always, John Barker from the 70th District. And we've brought a special guest in. He's brought a special guest in, Derek Schmidt from the Attorney General's office for the state of Kansas. Derek, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
And John's going to fill us in a little bit about where we are now with the legislature. Things are winding down. And John, fill us in.
Yeah, they're pretty down right now. We did our second adjournment. Well, you know, it's been a few weeks since we did a show because at the first adjournment, we worked on that Friday till late at night, so we did miss that one. And then this past Friday, we again were working when we were scheduled to do a show. So it's probably been about a month since we did a show. And so there's a number of things. I do anticipate next week having Jim Denning on, and the week after Dan Hawkins, the two majority leaders of the House and the Senate. I'm really grateful that the Attorney General could come down today and visit with us because he's got a load of information, and he is our attorney for the state of Kansas and represents the state quite well. But we did do the first adjournment on Saturday night. It was really Sunday morning, although we were still on the same legislative day. About 1:40 in the morning, we passed the budget. This was the third attempt, and it was a good budget. And then by passing that, we got out early. So we saved the state about $835,000 by getting out 10 days early. You know, that's something we like to do. We hate to stay late. So this year we got out early. The Senate Bill 25, which is the bill that was the appropriations bill, had more money in it than the governor had asked for because we felt we needed to hit a few extra areas. It had the education part of it, of course, that we talked about earlier at an earlier show. We added some additional money in for Department of Corrections and raised the minimum salary for officers because you've probably read in the paper about the problem that they were having in El Dorado. So we took care of that. In fact, I think we fixed all the issues. We did have to vote on it 3 times. There were a number of people in the House that did want to vote on it. They wanted to hold the Senate hostage and make them vote on Medicaid expansion. Well, anyone that's been there for a while knows that one body doesn't hold the other body a hostage. If they had tried to do that to us, we would have, you know, kind of consolidated our efforts and stood firm. They did that. So those members eventually, after we got our 63 votes, it took us 90 minutes at a call of the House, which means everybody has to sit in their seat until they vote. We finally arrived at 63, and then within 1 minute it jumped to 80 because the other members in the House realized that it was going to pass and they wanted to be on board. But it's been an interesting session. You know, next week we'll get into it a little bit more in depth. I'd like to talk to Jim Denning, the senator from Overland Park, what his perception was from the Senate's perspective. Ours was, it was, I thought, very smooth. I know they didn't take up a few issues that we'd sent over to them. Some I'm glad he didn't take them up. Others I wished he had taken up. But it's been a good session. I don't think the administration was prepared as other administrations have been. They didn't submit any bills. Their secretaries had not been confirmed. But overall, Doug, it's a year behind us, one less year.
Yeah, I understand. What legislation are you most pleased with, and which are you most disappointed in?
The one I'm very pleased with, we did not re-amortize the capers. You know, I was assigned to our committee for that, and I was able to get it out early, get it on the floor. It was defeated. It was what the governor wanted, to give her some additional cash this year to spend, but it would have cost $7.5 million over the 20, 30 years that she was asking to do that. So, and we talked about that at a show. One of the ones I really like is the windfall tax return. The federal government, of course, we talked about that in a previous show, where the federal government had changed the criteria. We were a rolling conformity type state, so we had to make some changes, or Kansans would pay more in Kansas taxes than they did the year before. It was an unintended consequences. We passed it the first time. The Senate, the governor vetoed it. We could not override the veto, so we changed it somewhat, and we cut some of the advantages to corporations out, but we left it in for the individual. We put that in with the internet tax. that would, when they start collecting that, it would decrease the sales tax. So it kind of works together. We again sent it back to the governor. Hopefully she will not veto it this time. You know, the folks in Kansas, the taxpayers, will not be paying additional taxes or more taxes than they did the year before.
Yeah, that seems to have become kind of a hot topic about the sales tax because of, I suppose, the other surrounding states, and that Kansas is higher than those. True? It is true.
It is true, and we have one of the highest income taxes in the surrounding states. You know, our consensus revenue, our revenues are up this year. I think with this budget, we will still have anywhere between $300 to $600 million left over, and that's a nice cushion to have. But you know, this governor likes to spend money, and we want to you know, keep some back for a rainy day. We paid off a loan that we had taken against on Capers this year, $132 million. We paid that off. So we're trying to be responsible with the taxpayers' money. And school finance, of course, is always a challenge. And I'm sure the Attorney General can talk more to that. He's been involved in it for probably his entire career.
Yes, unfortunately, that's true.
Yeah. Well, we're going to cut away, take a break. When we come back, we're going to ask the Attorney General about it. So keep watching. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And John's brought a special guest in, Derek Schmidt from the Attorney General's office. Matter of fact, he is the Attorney General. And Derek, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
And you are the 44th Attorney General.
True, for the state.
And you know, before we came on air, I said, well, Derek, first thing I'm going to ask you is, can you name the other 43? And we just laughed because that would be a going back a long period of time.
It would.
But I wouldn't be surprised you could. But in any event, so you're on your third term.
Right.
And, you know, I can tell you this from looking from the outside in, the Attorney General's office has done an excellent job. Many of the agencies you hear something about some point in time, they're in the news. And the Attorney General's office, it just does its job and seems to do it very well. So congratulations to you for that.
Well, thank you.
And
that's a high compliment. I hope that's true.
Well, you know, I can tell you over the years, I just haven't heard anything negative coming out of the Attorney General's office. And I know you guys do a lot of work, because we send you work to do too, and so do others, and you got a lot of responsibility. Tell the viewer what the Attorney General's office does.
Well, it's a really eclectic list of items. If you read the state constitution, you won't learn much about what we do because there's no list of duties, just says we exist. But over the years, the legislature's seen fit to establish lots of duties for us. In fact, I think there's something like 11 or 1,200 references to the Attorney General in the Kansas statute. So it's a really eclectic list. And I'm fond of saying, you know, if you're a legislator or the governor, your job is to try to be coherent. That is to say, you listen to people, you try to form priorities, and you go advocate for those. I mean, we do some of that, but that's not most of the Attorney General's job. We're more of an inbox agency. You don't know when somebody's going to sue the state and try to get a law invalidated. We have to respond. You don't know when somebody's going to commit a serious crime. It has to be investigated or prosecuted, or victims have to be supported. So it's a little harder to have a cohesive narrative on what we do. But a few of the bigger priorities, if you will, things we spend a lot of time on. We do a lot of consumer protection work around the state, whether it's door-to-door peddlers or telemarketers or other frauds. We do a lot of that work around the state. We do some criminal prosecution around the state. Most of that's done locally, but occasionally, and especially in major felonies, we get asked for help, and we try to always say yes if we can. We do a lot of Medicaid fraud investigation. That's a specialized area that the legislature's told us to do, and so we do it. Do a lot of crime victim support. We're the state's lawyer. When the state or its employees get sued, somebody has to defend them, and I always view that as defending the taxpayers, because the state doesn't have any money to pay a judgment except what it gets from the taxpayers. Right. We do a lot of that. Most of the time you'll never hear about it because it's routine, but sometimes, even though we're just being the state's lawyer, the subject matter gets us in the news, like a school finance case, for example. So those are the types of things we do. Well,
you mentioned the school finance case, so how long have you been involved in that litigation in some capacity?
Well, since I took the oath of office as Attorney General, the current lawsuit was filed by the plaintiff school districts right before I came into office, and we've been dealing with it ever since. We just, this past week, we went to the Kansas Supreme Court for the 7th time in this case, and we're hoping 7's our lucky number and the case is finally over, but we'll see what the court says.
Do you think it will be?
I think it should be, and I think there's every legal basis for it to be, and I'm really hopeful the court sees it the same way.
How many attorneys do you have working in your office?
We have about 50, just a shade over 50 attorneys in the office, which would make us the largest law firm in the state of Kansas.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We have a total number of employees of about 150. We have some law enforcement officers that work with us, the attorneys, some non-sworn investigators, for example, that do the consumer protection work. And then we have a lot of others that do things that the legislature has just told us to do over the years, and somebody has to do them. Things like we administer the state's concealed carry licensing program for concealed handguns. We run that. We have, I think, 4 employees that do that full time. And there are some other examples like that.
Okay, and what's the biggest challenge that you feel like you have in the AG's office?
You know, I feel like I ought to answer that by saying something really interesting and profound, but the truth of the matter is, whenever you lead a fairly large organization, the toughest challenge is getting and retaining talented people to do the work. And that's true. As we sit here today, I would like to be able to hire, not to expand, but just to fill vacancies. I'd like to be able to hire about 4 or maybe 5 good seasoned criminal prosecutors more than I have. We have the budget, we have the authority, we have the vacancies, and we're having a challenge finding the bodies that want to do it. So it's tough.
And where's your home base? Is it out of Independence?
Yeah, I'm an Independence guy, born and raised. Obviously, I don't commute from Independence to Topeka every day, so we stay up in Lawrence. My wife teaches over at the university, so one of us got to commute, and you can see who drew the short straw.
I can. I understand. And you see your wife's Jennifer, and you have 2 kids.
We do. They are, the girls are 8th and 9th graders, and they're terrific. I'm not biased at all, but they're terrific. And like I say, my wife's a professor at the law school at the university, so we've been very blessed.
I'm guessing in the middle of the night your phone rings pretty often with a problem, a question, something that's come up, and am I right?
It does from time to time, yes. I have the good fortune not being the sort of local first responder. I don't get the call on everything that happens like a county attorney or a sheriff might. But it's pretty typical when something major happens that the phone rings and somebody's letting me know, which I'm grateful for. That's part of the job.
Yeah. And part of your duties, of course, is working close with the legislature, like with Representative Barker.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that people like Judge Barker would come in, and then there would be questions. You say, hey, I need your opinion about this. And you're probably getting that from quite a few people who are doing their homework, trying to make that the best positions they can.
That's certainly true. I mean, the legislature has its own attorneys in the Reviser of Statutes office that works directly advising them, but it's very common that the phone will ring and it'll be John or it'll be one of his colleagues, one of the members of the Senate, and they want to talk through an item, or they have an idea, or they're wondering why we've done something, or whatever it may be. And we always try to work with them, and not just because he's sitting here, but working with Judge Representative Barker is always a pleasure. He is one that knows what's going on.
And
well, he does.
I did ask for an Attorney General's opinion last year, and I was able to get that out and make, you know, absent the court ruling, his ruling is binding on all of us until the court would intervene, and I always appreciate his staff. He's got some great people at work over there, and they are true public servants.
I have found that to be the case, John, in dealing with them. We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, Attorney General Derek Schmidt. And off to would be your left, as you're watching it on your television set, is John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And John's been representative for a number of years, and I can tell you that it is a pleasure to have somebody that is experienced. Both of these gentlemen are experienced. There's a learning curve. It doesn't matter what you go into, there is a learning curve. And so there's an advantage to have a representative who has been in the position multiple times, and the same is true with Derek. It's an advantage to have an experienced attorney. The staff gets used to the procedure that they go, and you get very familiar with it. And so I thank you for the commitment that you made to the state of Kansas, for both of you.
That's kind. Thank you. Thanks for letting us do this.
Yeah. Now, tell me about, let's talk a little bit about school finance, because, boy, that one's been going on for years and years. So it's in front of the court, and now what happens?
Well, eventually the court will rule. You know, this case has been to the Kansas Supreme Court. We had a trial way back in the day. Everybody's forgotten that, but there actually was a trial in the district court. And after that, the state appealed because the state lost at trial. And we've now been in the appellate stage for many years. And we just finished arguing 7th round of litigation on this case and the appeal at the Kansas Supreme Court. What happens is the court rules and says, not quite right. The legislature reacts to that. We take the legislature's action back to the court and say, how about now? The court so far has said, still not quite right. The legislature reacts to that. We've done that 7 times. I am really hopeful this time that the court will say good, or at least good enough. I'm optimistic based on the questioning from the bench, but of course that doesn't tell you anything until you see the opinion. But we have come so far. I mean, wherever you are on the substance of the issue, the bottom line math is that the state of Kansas will spend $1 billion. That's real state money. That's no funny money. That's no changed accounting. That is real money. $1 billion a year more by 2022, 2023 on schools than it was spending when this court case started, and surely that is enough.
Well, I would think, Derek, one of the things we get is the legislators come in throughout the period of this year, last year too, and one of the things they always complain about is it is difficult to hit a target that if you don't know what the target is. Right. Because they say, the court says, well, suitable. And well, what's that mean? And so here's more money. Is it suitable? No. Here's more money. And they prefer to have a target that they can reach. And I know that's difficult because that's the way that it's written.
It is, and that last phrase there, Doug, that's the way that it's written. I really think this isn't going to happen as long as this case is pending because, we're stuck within the confines of the case and the emotions of it. But I really think when this ends, and surely it will eventually end, we really need to have a thoughtful discussion as a state with the legislature and citizens and educators and about what we intend for that language in the state constitution to mean. Because we are so far removed from I think it's 15, 16 words in the Constitution, the most precise of which is suitable. And we've got, I held it up one time, we've got literally, it's like 1,100 pages of court opinions trying to tell us what that means. And maybe that's right. And maybe that's not what the people intended, and I think it's reasonable to ask them, but we're not there yet.
So there may be a constitutional question somewhere down the road?
I think there ought to be. I really think there ought to be, and it needs to be a thoughtful debate. It needs to not be, well, the court's bad or the legislature's bad or what. It just needs to be, is this really how Kansans want these funding questions resolved? And if it is, then vote down the amendment, and we'll keep doing it. But if it's not, it's the citizens that need to tell us, go some other way.
Well, it may get their attention to do so. One of the things that's going through right now, there was an appointment to the Court of Appeals, and that's garnered a lot of attention. Fill us in on that.
Right. Well, this is, in one sense, one of those inside baseball games because it's been portrayed as a battle between the Senate and the governor, and the Supreme Court's involved. But it's really much more than that. From our vantage point at the Attorney General's office, we don't really care who makes the appointment to the court. There's a vacancy, and the issue is, by law, who gets to make that appointment right now. We'll talk about that. We don't really care what the answer is. We just want the right answer, and here's why. Because if it's not plainly the right answer, for example, if the governor makes the next appointment, but it turns out that's not what the law means, it was supposed to have been the Chief Justice, which is one of the options, or vice versa, then every litigant, every criminal defendant who has a case in front of that judge in the future, it'd be malpractice if they don't argue, sure, I get a do-over once I lost because we didn't have a properly seated judge.
Hadn't thought of that, yeah.
And that's why the state wants the certainty up front. The issue here is that there's a statute that governs how Court of Appeals vacancies are to be filled. And the front part of that process is that the governor has 60 days to make an appointment, and then the Senate votes whether to confirm or not confirm. In this case, what happened is the governor made her appointment on day 60, no time to spare, and then new information came out and she changed her mind. So she withdrew that appointment 3 or 4 days later. There's a question whether it happened 3 or 4. She withdrew it after the 60th day. So now what happens? She has 60 days to make an appointment. She made but withdrew the appointment. Does she get to make another one? Well, the next one is longer than 60 days, 65, 66 days. Does she get a do-over? Well, the part of the statute that says you try again is only triggered after the Senate votes, but the Senate didn't vote. So there's a gap in the statute. And we just need a definitive answer, so we're trying, and we've asked the Supreme Court to sort it out. We'll see if they do.
When are you anticipating a response from the Supreme Court?
Well, I hope soon. We argued it, as we're filming this, it was just yesterday, but the tricky part of this is one of the issues that's not really clear is whether when the governor tried to withdraw her first appointee, she succeeded. There is at least a plausible argument that she didn't have the authority to withdraw the appointment. If that's the case, we don't need to figure out who makes the next appointment because the first one is still pending in front of the Senate, and there's this clock that ticks. If the Senate doesn't vote by a certain day, that person is deemed confirmed to the court. Well, how odd would it be if you had a nominee that the governor put up, said, now I don't want him, the Senate doesn't want him either, but he winds up on the court because nobody acted. So it's really a muddled situation.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson. As you can tell, the special guest, Derek Schmidt from the Attorney General's office. He is the Attorney General. And as always, John Barker from the 70th District. John, we appreciate you being here again. And I know that next week, because you line up the special guests that come in usually, or many times they come to you and have something that they want to share, and that's fantastic. And I know next week you're bringing in Jim Denning, the Majority Leader from the Senate.
He's been on the show before, but now that the session is over with, you know, we can actually talk about bills that have passed the last few days and whether or not the governor has signed any of those bills or vetoed some of those bills between now and then. And then the following week, Dan Hawkins, the House Majority Leader.
Certainly. And both of them have been on the show multiple times. Derek, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
It's been my
pleasure.
Take care.
You've been watching Legislative Updates. See you next time.